Welcome to week 4. We're going to look at distinguishing key factors of orality today, and then the Bible as story. We'll begin with the orality section. Some of our objectives for this particular lesson is to discover what those key distinguishing factors are in relation to orality, and then what are some of the benefits that we can gain from that to improve our storying and improve our curricula. I love the, if you've not seen it, the big billboard sign by the highway that says, illiterate, ? Write for free help. Yes, that's a little bit of our understanding of illiteracy. But it is serious. Isaiah makes this statement in chapter 29, verse 19. He says, "Then the book will be given to the one who is illiterate, saying, 'Please read this.' And he will say, 'I do not know books.'" Yeah. So it's an issue out there. And even today, that was written how many thousands of years ago? But today, the same thing. How many people read books? Yeah, very, very few. So that's why Clancy said this before. I think I've said this before, but he says the most difficult thing for us to recognize is what is that initial history that preceded the written script, the story. And of course, it goes back to orality, and we have forgotten that. And remember, Ong in his book, that classic book, Orality and Literacy, gave us two ways to look at it, primary and secondary. Primary being those who don't know how to read, and secondary is those who do know, but yet prefer other means to learn, to communicate, to think, and so forth. So he's given us those two perspectives. We'll continue to build on those, refine those as well. And as you remember, Ion has told us 80% of the world, that's 5.7 billion people prefer to be oral communicators in one way or the other. And even when we get to the other side, of the digital side of it, from orality to literacy to digital world that we live in today, then in the US, for the teens, 62% will spend at least 4 hours, if not more, on the screen, watching this, doing that, so forth. And 28% will spend 8 hours or more looking at that screen. So that tells you a little bit about the world that we are living in today. But there's connections all the way through, as we've said. One is connected to the other, And so if we look at some of the oral implications that are there, and I want to do this for the oral and the literate and the digital, just to give us a ballpark look at it, and then we'll get down into more specifics. So on the oral side of it, it's face-to-face. You tend to think much more non-linearly. It's much more communal. So you have not just the private eye, but the public eye that's always looking, always seeing. This helps drive homogeneity, as we're one group, one little group, can be networks and so forth, or big cultures. The social skills that one gets in this type of society are very, very strong. And of course, the concrete is going to communicate. That's what will be preferred. This will be repeated, and repetition is definitely required to make this understandable over long periods of time. And what that does is it sharpens our memory and makes us good memorizers. We understand, we can take things and see them and remember them. And the relationships are, of course, very personal, very physical, that are there. If we move to the literate implications, now we're face to page, and we start to think linearly, right? Drop down, go across, drop down, at least in the English world here. And the individuality becomes very, very strong, which then promotes privacy. and this drives diversity. That's there. So once again, rather than the concrete, the abstract is very, very important. And of course, every story has what? A beginning, a middle, and an end. And so, but now our memory starts to get challenged a little bit. We're not quite as sharp as those coming out of that oral world. And our social skills also are starting to diminish because of that. And our relationships, rather than being physical, now become vicarious. And then we move to the digital world, some of the implications there. Now we're face to screen. Remember those teenagers in the US, 8 hours looking at that screen for 28% of them. Failure is expected to happen. And so it's now we start to get it, instead of being just very nice and linear, right? Now it's random. It's going all over the place. So we've gone from non-linear to linear, and now we go to random, trying to search for things. And in this sea of knowledge that's out there, what we're trying to do is find out what's the significance in this mass out here. So we have to hone this stuff down. And what that has done is impacted our attention span, which is now much shorter than it used to be. And this drives diversity and change, of course, because now you've got all these ideas that are coming at you. But what it does also, it levels the playing field. So if you've got a computer, if you've got a phone, you can be in touch with the world and you can communicate to the world. So the abstract and concrete now kind of come together in this particular mode here, the digital mode. And social skills, once again, tends to be diminished, as well as our memory. We don't have to remember what the information is. All we have to do is remember how to get to that information. Very, very different. And so our relationships and our networks now have become very virtual because of that. And interestingly, it was Scragg, I think, who said, we talked about we live in an information revolution. And he says, no, we really live in a relationship revolution. That's where we are today. And very, very true. So he was really on to something. That was written, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Let me give you a quick overview or of a definition. And this continues to develop as I work on it. And remember Foley's comment about the definition of orality from last week, that it's in dire need of a look at and a change. And so this is an attempt to do that. It'll probably change by the end of this class, but that's okay. So here's what I put. Orality then is the reliance on, and that's by choice or circumstances, because sometimes you're born into it and sometimes you choose to be in it. So, and that's what Lynn Thigpen referred to, that dark side of orality, because it causes all that shame because of the circumstances. You were born into that, so you don't know how to read. So that impacts it. So orality is the reliance on a natural, it's universal. It's natural in the sense what? Everybody has it. It's universal. Everybody uses it. Living, so it has a social implication to it. Multisensory, so it's sound and sight put together, wedded together. Mode, to receive, reflect, implement, relay, and remember. So it covers the whole gamut, is what it does. How's this accomplished? It's accomplished then through relationships, whether material, spiritual, or human. And all that does, that whole thing does, is it creates a social identity as to who you are. So I'll read it once more all the way through now. Orality is the reliance on, or by choice or circumstances, a natural, universal, living, social, multisensory, sound, sight, mode to receive, reflect, implement, relay, and remember. This is accomplished through the relationships, material, spiritual, and human, all of which creates a social identity as to who you are. Okay, let's look at some of those components that comprise orality. And these would be just some of the key ones. There's a lot more that could be added to this, but we'll give you some of the central ones at least. And I think one of the first ones is that spoken words have power. We have tended to forget that. But my words can be used to bless you or to curse you. Yeah, words have power. And I remember one of the verses I never understood until I ended up with the Ifugao was in, I think it was Acts 8, where Simon, the sorcerer, sees what Peter is doing here. And Peter and John were working with these people, and the Holy Spirit's now coming on these people through what they were doing by laying their hands on them. And so Simon decides, as a sorcerer, right? He knows power when he sees it. He wants to get that, and here's a little money to help me to get that power. And Peter comes right back on him and basically tells him, "Rotten hell, Simon," and the pretty strong language there. And Simon is just like beside himself right now. No, he's like, take it back, Peter. Don't let this happen. Don't let this happen. He knows power. He knows the power of words, and he knew that Peter had actually just cursed him. I totally missed that until I got around the Ifugao and saw that type of power in use. Spoken words have power. I can use my words to bless you. I can use my words to curse you. Another key component, a key factor to orality, is that communal relationships are central. It's a groupness that is paramount, that has to happen in this type of communication, orality. It's people, it's dialogue going back and forth between people, and it's in groups, and it's centered on relationships. And that requires then what? Participation. You have to participate in this type of society. You can't just sit there on the sideline. No, you're going to participate. You're going to interact with your colleagues and your friends and your family members and so forth. And what this does then, it offers an opportunity to build trust relationships with the people that you're dialoguing with. And some of those are not going to ever end up in trust, but that's how you start to find out who you can trust and who you can't. It's in this groupness, it's in the dialogue that goes on. Another factor will be that it concentrates on the concrete. It's not that abstractness is not mentioned or totally devoid of it. No, it's there, but the focus is going to be on concreteness. This is where it's going to start. This is what they appreciate. And it's also going to concentrate on conflict between characters, changes that take place, clashes that happen internally with people and externally with other people as well. So it's going to focus very strongly on what brings conflict to the dialogue and the conversation, the actions and so forth. So conduct and conversation are going to be key here in understanding this. The focus is also going to be on the symbols, stories, and rituals. Those are visible things that can be seen or heard. And so those are going to be the things they're going to look for, the chaos and the conflict that is going to take place in them. Another key component is going to be a preference for that big picture. We want to see the big picture. We've emphasized the parts. They would like to see the big picture, the wholeness coming into play here. So rather than just the parts of the apple, they like seeing the entire apple. Now, once they see that entire apple, now you can start breaking up it into parts, but all those parts have to be connected right back to that apple to make that apple come back and be complete. Another key component is they prefer a nonlinear process as they go through things, and so it's it's kind of like a river going through the terrain there, and so it's not straight, it's nonlinear. Whereas when we get to literacy, that's the linear, and then when we get to the digital world, that's the random that takes place. But they prefer a nonlinear way. Well, for us, that's just downright confusing, right? We need to have just here to here, A to B, X to Y. So those are the things we need to know, but not preferred in the oral world. They learn also through imitation, through apprenticeships. And so they like to see this happen, and they like to watch, observe, and then try it. Give them books on theory, not going to work. Not going to work. But show them how it can be done, demonstrate it, and let them try it. Now we're getting somewhere. And so it's basically in the oral world, it's experientially based. That will be key for understanding in that world. But to get there, it also has to be repetitious. And while I hate to be repetitious here, but and I'll go and say something again, but they don't precede that with, I hate to say this, but I've already said this once, but no, you repeat it. Let's just expect it. And that repetition helps get it ground in the mind. Okay, that becomes the library for the internet for that. And that's how the learning then takes place. And it takes place through events, and it takes, as one event builds on the other, so we have an aggregate going here, and an aggregate of events that they learn from, and that builds understanding in their own minds and so forth. And that's how it is accomplished. And another key component is going to be a key factor would be that the messenger is considered superior to the message. And we focus on the message, they're going to focus on the messenger. They like the message, but they want to start with the messenger first. Is that person legit? Can we trust this person as to who is this person? If we know who it is and we trust him, then we're going to listen to his message. We say, here's the message. This is what's important. That collective memory then that they have as a group is going to focus on the symbols, stories, and rituals. Those are observable things, visual things that they can see or hear. And so that collective memory is going to focus on there. But what that helps then do, that collective memory maintains then their oral tradition. That's where they go to. What do you understand of this? What do I understand of this? What do they understand of that? That collective memory then guards the oral tradition. And all of us have oral tradition of some sort. We may have the written as well, but we also have oral tradition. But this is guarded for them through collective memory. But once again, they understand that memory is really limited. So it's going to spotlight just certain things. And what it's going to do, because memory is limited, and it's going to spotlight the practical. Where the print spotlights, what does it spotlight? The theoretical and then the possible. Whereas when you're limited in your memory, we don't have the internet, we don't have the libraries that we refer to or use if we have them, then it's going to focus on this is practical, this is what we need to do, and this is what we can do to keep our oral traditions alive and well. They also prefer people who are really articulate, and I think of Martin Luther King and so forth. Very articulate, smooth tongue. I mean, they could just talk and you just sit there listening, just their words just grab you and keep you. So that's very much appreciated in the oral world. Also, another key factor is they believe that black and white is really, really rare. Most of the world is gray. So they prefer bounded ambiguity, and that's assumed that is there. It's bounded ambiguity. And that the contradictions, they don't have a problem with that. And I mean, when we say, looking at the Gospels, right, and why did Matthew include this and Luke didn't include this, and this is different in Mark, and and so forth. Those contradictions just bug the daylights out of us. That's just life, right? So no problem. They don't have problems with bounded ambiguity. But notice I said bounded ambiguity. So there are some boundaries out there. They're very messy and mushy, but they're there to keep that ambiguity somewhat in check. And we'll look at this more when we get to the oral hermeneutics at the end of the class. Also, this whole orality thing is connected to honor and shame. Very strongly connected to honor and shame. because it's collective. And once you have collective, you have a form of honor and shame that's going to be there. This is Andy Crouch's article that I think, noted before. That, excuse me, the good news about shame, he wrote it for Christianity Today. And in that, he calls the shame fame. And so that's a nuanced understanding of shame and fame here in the West. And so he looks at that, and the goal, of course, is for you, your stuff to go viral, whatever that means today. And you get fame by that. When that happens, you receive fame. And your greatest fear is what? That somebody's not going to like you, actually defriend you, and you can get revenge by defriending them. So lots of reciprocity going on, right? You follow them. Hey, it's kind of expected. Now you're going to follow me, right? So that whole thing of reciprocity is all, yes, reciprocity is there. And he's speaking just to the West here. And to get a real updated version of it, would think cancel culture today. So the omnipresence of social media has created a new sort of shame culture that we have here in the West. So it's strong connection to honor and shame as well. Well, these are some of the universal orality factors, but one of the things we have to realize, as we noted last week, that these, while universal, these are going to be expressed locally. So expect nuances all the way through here. And that just shows you why we have to really get in and study these things and how they then take those universals and localize them. That once we've done that, that allows us to then leverage those factors in a way that can enhance our communication of the gospel, communication and discipleship and leadership development, followership development, and on it goes. Okay, so it's time for our breakout group. I want you to take 10-15 minutes here and discuss the benefits of orality. What do you see individually and collectively as the benefits of orality? Okay, let's hear what you came up with. What did you find out for the benefits of orality? What can we learn from that we can use in our own storing, in our own curricular development, our own lives, and so forth? I want to end this session with a question, and probably one we may not have thought of, but how does orality influence architecture? And then one we may have thought about, how does orality influence theology? Wow. And my colleague, Doug Hayward, anthropologist there at the Cook School of Intercultural Studies at Biola, has made many trips to South Sulawesi, and we have a friend there who was one of our graduates. She was the queen there, and so both of us have been made puang, so we're lords there. I'm not quite sure what that all means, but we are. Anyway, he's visited the housing there, and I put a picture of one of the houses there in the PowerPoint. And he stayed in about 4 or 5 different places. And what he found out with every one of those homes have about 4 or 5 gathering places that people can come, sit around, and talk. What he didn't find is any office space where you could go and have a desk and write and so forth. Wasn't there. Because it's only been in 2 or 3 generations that the literate world has really come in strongly. And even he visited one of the scholars' homes. There was no office, no desk to write on. That individual would go to the school, and he would use the office school to do his writing. So orality influenced the architecture of those particular homes there among the Toraja people. We could ask the same thing. How does orality influence church architecture? We'll leave that as a rhetorical question. I also want to note, in theological education, you kind of look back in time, and back in the 1920s when all the Bible institutes came into play as a reaction to the social gospel at that time. And from there, they went into Bible colleges and a lot of Bible Institute or Bible universities from there. So Biola went from Bible Institute, B-I-O-L-A, Biola Bible Institute of L.A., and it became a college and then a university over time. But it's interesting and seminaries, of course, came out of that as well. When you look back in the 1960s, when the theological education by extension movement started, and we went from the formal now back to where we're headed towards the non-formal in theological education. And then in 1981, when the chronological Bible teaching took place, that has started to influence a lot of different things, Bible translation and also theology, how it's going to be handled. And then the Southern Baptists pick it up and go to chronological Bible teaching, then the Bible storing itself, and then I should say it went to chronological Bible storing, and then Bible storing, and then the OBS, Oral Bible Schools. That was a term coined by Lynn Thigpen. And so we've gone from very formal to non-formal in our theological education. And it's interesting now, even now in our formal, I just received two things today, one from Daystar and one from the International Baptist Church in Manila, which is a pretty big church, and how the pastor there, David Grimm, uses a story during Sunday service, and then in their small groups, the story is told again, and now it's dissected and dialogued about. So it's interesting how orality is now coming back and making its impact in theological educations, and then beyond that, that's the great part, now into our churches as well. And that's exactly what we want to have happen, that they see the practicality and the necessity of orality, and that it can be a great tool, not only for communicating, but for being as well, and then for memory as well. It remains there. So those would be some of the factors that are little offshoots of orality, but definitely needed and necessary, and there's probably a lot more we could look at. So just in sum, what are some of the benefits of oral communication? Well, it's easier to memorize. That's one thing. And its relationship is with the teacher, first and foremost. So that's the second thing. And orality calls for community, dialogue, right? Participation, the back and forth. They appreciate that. And this is one of the things I saw happen when I watched the Ifugao move from a strongly oral society into a more literate society, is that definitions began to change. Truth went from trustworthiness to accuracy. Yeah, we start out, we think truth is accuracy, right? But in the oral side, it becomes trustworthiness. And so you trusted the other person. And the way they did that if there was conflict for the Ifugao is that it would be, you would have somebody leading the conversation who had brought the two parties that were fighting over something, brought them together, and they agreed to certain things, and then they would drink rice wine together. Once they drank rice wine together, then that was considered, this is settled. And it was, they trusted one another then after that this was work out. Accuracy? No, it wasn't there. They would later now buy life insurance, and they would sign their name. And so it was dependent on their name written right, accurately, who they are, all that kind of stuff. So definitions definitely changed as well. Other parts that happened was that oral cultures tend to think formulaically. In other words, they have ways of putting the story together, and those are culturally influenced. And so that's why we have to look at what are the formulas that they how they put together stories. And once we find them, once again, we can leverage them and present the Bible stories in that way as well. And that will make memory, once again, understanding and then memory and possible application much, much stronger. In oral societies, you're expected to speak on the spot, right? And Westerners hate that for the most part. I'm speaking generally here. But, oh, can you give us, you're walking into place and somebody, oh, we'd like to give us a 10, 15, 20-minute survey. He said, you think, wait, where's my notes? Where's my notes? I need, an oral person can get up there and just, they just go, right? Not a problem for them. For us paper-oriented people, much more difficult. And orality is a language of action. It does something. It's very pragmatic. There's action involved in that. And one of the things, and we will look at this at the last week as well, is that the print that we get through Gutenberg and so forth from then on, which emphasize reason in a very, very strong way, is going to challenge narrative logic. And so we're going to distinguish propositional logic from narrative logic. But print was going to challenge narrative logic. That's the way of thinking and processing that is so normal in the for the oral people, and doing it through a concrete way of philosophy, which is very, very different from our own. Well, one of the things you've heard right brain, left brain, and that has been critiqued to a certain extent because we separated the two. And what we have to understand, yes, there's a lot of truth in this though, right brain and left brain, but we have to learn that these are actually interrelated. And when we start telling stories to people, there's things that happen within our brain. There's parts of our brain that get activated when they hear a story that makes those characters and so forth come alive and want to become, and we want them to become part of us, or rebel against them and don't want them to become part of us. So we have to look at the differences between the right brain and the left brain, but recognizing that those two are definitely interrelated all the way through. So this is a little summary of what some of the key factors that are there and some of the implications there in our architecture and our theology, and we could add to that, of course, and then getting into the right brain, left brain, and seeing how these two are actually infused together, and we need to be able to take advantage of them when we move in to learn about orality and move that into our life and into the way we teach and into the way we think and into the way we be as well.